Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions on all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our society at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. Now, for those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Sunday, and we actually just dropped a thought piece this past Sunday, so be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you are looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available on 10 different podcast platforms for your listening leisure, and we've provided you with access to the links in the description down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like our conversations and you want to keep them going, like, comment, and share this segment. Let's get into it. Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today our topic of discussion is education. And on the topic of education today, it's going to be a critique on aspects of our education system that are less focused on learning and more focused on conditioning. And when we talk about conditioning, we're really talking about building this conformity mindset and this conformity expectation and some of the rules and regulations that are put in place that really have nothing to do with fostering an environment that is conducive to learning. And if we are allowing different rules and different methods and manners of engagement to take place, this is a very important conversation, because at Project Purpose, one of our core philosophies is on really cultivating a strong sense of self-concept. And a sense of self-concept is really built on a foundation of authenticity and of knowing oneself, recognizing the value that we bring to every conversation, to every room that we come in, and having a sense of our own evolution. So being very aligned by way of who we are and who we are becoming in our evolution across our delta. So mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, so on and so forth. That is a huge pillar that we're hoping to accomplish here at Project Purpose, because we do recognize that as a byproduct of being coursed through the education system, we all have this collective identity crisis, right? And I do believe that there is a problem in society if it is such an endeavor and it requires so much courage to live authentically. And as much as we celebrate and we like to call out authenticity as something that we all value, many of us have a hard time living in our truth, living in authenticity, because of the systems we were coursed through, right? And specifically our education system. So a lot of what is allowed by way of rules and regulations that govern specific institutions, again, have nothing to do with learning, more to do with conditioning. And I think that we need to become more aware of the conditioning aspects of these institutions that create create for identity erasure. And I think identity erasure is really what we're up against when we're trying to cultivate self-concept. And it's hard to cultivate self-concept if you spent your whole life conforming, bending, adapting to the expectations of others, even if those expectations run against the grain of who you are as an individual. And I'm here to talk about that because I think that there is aspects of the conditioning that takes place in these collective environments that really are targeting our individuality, targeting the way that we show up authentically, show up as ourselves, the way that we learn that is very individualized. And I think it's about time that we begin to cultivate the language and cultivate the lens to be able to push back on the rules that really don't have much to do with learning and more to do with eroding one's sense of self-identity, making one feel self-conscious about one's sense of self-identity. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the conversation. And I have like 3 core points of this part of our conversation at education. And I think one of them is really the attack against self-identity. And I think that there's a lot of erasure that takes place in institutions when we have rules built on conformity in terms of behaviors that are acceptable. And I am a huge believer of if the behavior isn't harmful, it should be acceptable. If you have people putting stipulations on one's behavior that has absolutely nothing to do with harming other people, so just like we expect people to behave in this very specific, very narrowed way, then even that expectation, holding yourself to that expectation can be a bit of an identity erasure if you're not that way naturally. Some people are naturally very quiet, very pensive, thoughtful, they're slow to speak, they're more so observers, and you have different environments that cater to that sort of profile of individual. But if you have someone who's more outspoken, who's lively, who's vibrant, who's bubbly, and you put them in that environment, then they can't help but feel that by bending to those rules that there is something inherently wrong with who they are and how they present naturally. So I'm here to talk about just different rules that we can read through, different ways of engaging that we can come across that we should push back on, because it really speaks to identity erasure. And if there's an environment that requires some sort of cost to entry, if there's a cost to enter into that space, if you're paying out of pocket to be in that space, if there's some sort of personal sacrifice involved with learning in a specific space, then you should also have the privilege of being in that space authentically, right? You shouldn't have aspects of your identity immediately judged and criticized and scrutinized when you're in a space that you've paid to be part of, right? And even if you haven't paid to be part of this space, I think it builds the argument a bit more if you've put money and you've put in an investment in being in a specific space, you have more leverage to push back on the rules of engagement that take place in being in that specific space. But if you are mandated to be in a specific space, and all the more reason, like if I'm mandated to be here, like why can't I show up here authentically as who I am? Why do I have a sense that my individuality immediately is being attacked in this space just based on like the governing rules that have nothing to do with like ensuring the safety of each person, is more to do with creating a culture that involves establishing certain behaviors as best in class behaviors and other behaviors as untoward, when some of these behavioral characteristics are fundamental to our identities. And I think that's a big point, and I think that that's something that we need to push back on. And it's hard for us to do so because when we are in different spaces, or when we've grown accustomed to being in different spaces that make us feel self-conscious about who we know ourselves to be, then most of us go into hiding. And it's very hard to be in hiding all of your childhood throughout your adolescence and then to come into your own as an adult. And I think that this is a pattern, this is a cycle that is really toxic. I think it's an unhealthy cycle, and it's a cycle that we've normalized. We've normalized it to the extent that many of us are aware of the fact that we only feel comfortable being authentically ourselves with a certain group of people, or we recognize that we don't feel comfortable at all being our authentic self because who we were was so vehemently attacked in our primary formative years that we're happy to keep that person tucked in, hidden under. And that's why we celebrate people who like live authentically, or we hate people who live authentically, right? Someone's authenticity can be very triggering if we have felt judged and criticized and scrutinized for trying to be authentic and then making the choice and resigning ourselves to hide under a shell or under a persona that we don't even really like, but society has deemed as appropriate. When we deal with environments that create identity erasure, that create a sense of self-consciousness about who we are authentically, and it creates different groups of individuals who have resigned to different degrees to the nature of these settings, so have conformed by varying degrees, then the people who aren't conforming, so the people who are anti-conformist but also not self-destructive, who still have an ability to thrive or rise through the ranks in these environments that typically are very punitive to those who kind of step out of rank and who don't abide by the rules, then they're subject to a lot of like heavy criticism, heavy envy, a lot of jealousy from people who just haven't cultivated the courage, the will, the desire to live out authentically. I mean, they want to, but it's just not worth the cost, essentially. I think that they want to be authentic, but they also want to be in these environments that would hinder and harm them if they were to show up authentically. So they are very harsh and critical and envious of people who are in those environments, but happen to be in those environments their true selves. So I think that this is something that the educational system has created. I think that because the educational system is more focused on conditioning, less focused on actually educating, on learning, then we have these different types of people that now we're navigating amongst in our day-to-day that have different attitudes and different triggers when it comes to authenticity, when it comes to living authentically, because they themselves haven't had that opportunity, they haven't been provided that privilege, so they really envy and have a lot of bitterness and resentment to people who are authentic, and that is a problem, I believe, that stems from our education system. So what's my point here? My point here is Project Purpose is focused on anti-conformist ideologies because that's really the foundation to support, value, and protect our individuality, right? In a society that is forcing conformity, right? That is conditioning behaviors, that wants to have an opinion on what behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors are not, that are above and beyond maintaining the safety of the collective. I think that we need to then have a different school of philosophy, school of beliefs that involve how do we protect our individuality. And so for me, because Project Purpose is really about establishing, building a foundation of individuality and cultivating the tools to protect your individuality as it's growing and evolving, as you're absorbing different information, as you're deciding how this information translates and how this information builds into your sense of individuality, then we need to have it within a specific lens that values individuality. And the one lens that I feel is truly a lens that has a strong value for individuality, however it is that translates, is anti-conformity. And so when we think about schools of philosophy that focus on protecting, cultivating, reinforcing individuality, it's really about also breaking the systems of conformity, having sort of a stance of resistance against conditioning behaviors, against rules that are less about safety, more about conditioning, more about creating a culture that has undertones of hostility towards people who don't show up a specific way. And I think that it's very important that as we think about diversity, we recognize diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of individuality is something that's considered as well. And it's only going to be something that we can normalize if we allow more people the privilege, the opportunity to be themselves without feeling that heavy hammer, that heavy hand of criticism, judgment, and scrutiny, without people feeling like they're being punished and penalized for being who they are, and in turn punishing and penalizing other people for being who they are. So that's the conversation that I wanted to have today. It's food for thought, and I do believe that anti-conformity, anti-conformist ideals is the move forward. Like if we're really wanting to, I guess, ride this natural wave, this natural trend, focusing on individuality, on embracing who we are, and it not being such a glamorized experience. I think if we try to normalize what that should feel like, then it should start when we're very young, right? It should start our first experience in education and any sort of educational institution, whether it's private or public, whether it's government mandated or one of the courses that we offer at Project Purpose. It's really about celebrating our individuality, recognizing that we don't have to tolerate our individuality coming into attack just by simply being present in an environment where we're there to learn, where we're there to grow, where we're there to develop and cultivate alternate perspectives. So I think that this is something that I wanted to put on your radar because so few of us really look at the rules of engagement as an attack on individuality, as a method of erasing one's sense of identity, erasing one's sense of authenticity, to then now later down the line, a few years later, they're in their first job interview and trying to communicate what makes them special. You know, how do they bring a specific flavor to that conversation, and them struggling to cultivate that because of the years of conditioning that made them feel like anything that made them stand out, anything that made them special, anything that made them different was something that they were going to experience punishment or penalty for. So I think it's important to have that conversation, to put that on your radar, so the next time you're reading rules of engagement or reading different prose about how one should show up in specific environments, you ask yourself, are these rules enforcing some degree of identity erasure? Like, should I push back on some of these rules because I recognize that who I am authentically, which should be valued by the institutions that I decide to place my foot in, is that under attack with me trying to conform and bend to these specific rules? How much of me can I be in trying to follow these rules and regulations? And I think that that should be the lens that we use when we think about any of the environments that we want to spend a considerable amount of time in. And that's the conversation for today. I had those points that I wanted to make by way of talking about identity. So really, again, just quickly summarize, talking about the demarcation between learning and conditioning, talking about how different conditioning involves conformity and how that conformity leads to identity erasure, and how later down the line, when we're struggling to cultivate a sense of what value we bring, what aspects of our individuality are going to be to the betterment of the environments that we're in, we struggle to do that because of all the conforming, the adapting, the bending we've done, and how that makes us very vulnerable to attack, right? So those of us who have conformed to the detriment of our own sense of authenticity, to the detriment of our sense of individuality, of cultivating shame and embarrassment around who we are actually, so we bury that person, we're the ones who are very quick and very vocal at penalizing others for being authentic. And I think that to break this cycle of punishment and reward by way of the degrees of authenticity that we display, we need to give everyone permission to show up authentically. In any case, that is it for today, but definitely not all. And definitely subscribe, hit that like button, show us that you appreciate the content that we're putting out. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're really trying to hit 1K. That's the big goal for the moment. So every follow counts. So we're super appreciative of everyone who is partaking and contributing to our community. Now, before letting you go, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that we will be going live at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our Facebook page. So definitely be sure to join in on those live events. Now, these events are paid events, so if you do see yourself participating and engaging with our community on an ongoing basis, then I do suggest that you take a look at one of our package plans. So we do have package plans that give you unlimited access to our live events, as well as access to webinars and workshops over and above those live events. So definitely be sure to take a look at those. And yeah, and if you're worried about any of the pricing by way of the products and services that we offer, please don't be. We've just incorporated a new payment solution, Afterpay, that gives you the opportunity to pay in 4 installments over a period of 6 weeks. So happy to make our programming more accessible to all of you. The objective is to make our programming accessible to everyone. And yeah, and we're growing, and we're very excited about our growth. We're very excited that you are watching here right now and are participating and thinking about the conversations that we're putting out there in the ether. And yeah, so looking forward to continuously growing, evolving, and developing the game changer community that is the Project Purpose community. And I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.